So good morning. I'm Otto Vives. I'm actually President and CEO of Orcatech, and it's really been my privilege to actually work with Orcatech and actually find out about how we could really develop some technology to help people find the signal in the noise. So, and I appreciate everybody getting up so early this morning to actually come and attend this presentation. So without any further ado, let me give you a quick idea of what we're going to be covering today. We're going to be talking about big data, and I think big data is very prevalent in the world that we live in today. But we're also going to talk about the data risk that's currently facing the organizations. And then we're going to talk about some of the unique technology that we bring to the table, specifically the dolphin research that took place, and then the analytics that actually converted into, and how that actually, the technology that got developed around that, and the machine learning algorithms, and then basically how that morphed just from purely an Ediscovery solution initially into something much greater, which was really an ecosystem. So, without any further ado, let's go. And by the way, campus, thank you very much for having us today.
Thank you.
Giving us the opportunity. So, within the enterprise, we're talking about a massive amount of data. They estimate by the end of 2015 there's going to be 7.9 zettabytes. For those of you that don't know what a zettabyte is, it's a billion terabytes, so 7.9 billion terabytes of data. It's just staggering. As executives of corporations, it's impossible for us to actually know what's going on in our own data. And you know, to compound the problem, 90% of this data is unstructured. And you know, the real challenge with unstructured data is that there's no really, really good tools to actually go and try and find the information. And the other side of the coin is a lot of this data actually represents potentially liability for organizations as well. So the way we kind of traditionally just stored information, we just kind of threw it all into kind of a black hole, and then we try and use technology to try and get it out of there. So the bottom line is that really storing stuff is easy, trying to find it is really, really hard. So the trick is, how do we find it? And the traditional way of actually doing this, or the gold standard, is keyword searching. If you look at every single document management system, every archiving system in the world today, the gold standard is keyword searching. And quite frankly, just by this report that was done by Blair and Marin, frankly, quite a few years ago, okay, this proves, okay, that keyword searching is really, really ineffective. This is actually litigation where lawyers were actually using keywords to actually try and look for stuff. This is kind of what they thought they found, that's what they actually found. So it's really, the challenges that you have with keywords is that keywords are very over-inclusive, very under-inclusive, and it's very, very problematic. So there had to be a better way. So we kind of thought, why not the Harry Potter approach? Instead of you actually going to try and find all this information, rather just walk in, ask the document, and the documents will just come flying to you. Much better approach. So, yeah, great theory. But what actually happened is our chief scientist, Dr. Herb Rotblatt, spent 18 years in Hawaii. And he was actually a professor at the University of Hawaii. And while he was there teaching psychology and audiology, he actually got a government grant with the US Navy to do research on sonars of dolphins. And while he was actually studying the dolphins and the echolocation techniques that they use, he actually came up with an algorithm to help us make concept search. And what this concept search does, it works on the principles of echolocation, of how you can actually find text in very large bodies of text. So that's kind of the fundamental premise of where some of our patented technology comes from, which is essentially concept search, which is kind of the next generation of search after keyword searching. So what exactly is concept search? Concept search really helps you find things in context. So in other words, if we were doing a concept search for court, the software would basically go and look at court almost like it would do keyword searching, but then it would actually search in proximity of court in the text and actually find some additional things that might give it context. So if you look at court and it now finds a judge, now it actually understands what court means. It actually finds court in a basketball, now it knows what that court means. So it actually gives you stuff in context. So that's fundamentally how it's different. I think a lot of the search technologies that people have actually used traditionally have been dependent on taxonomies, and things like that. Our stuff is all math-based, so we don't need taxonomies to actually do what we do. So this is a very good example where we actually were using the tool, searching for something called rawhide. The data set we were looking at was actually the Enron data set. And if you think about rawhide, you might think about television programs, or you might think about leather products. Turns out rawhide in this context was actually one of those secret partnerships formed by Andy Fastow at Enron to actually hide some pretty dodgy transactions. So what we've actually found when we searched for rawhide, you can see we were primarily searching for rawhide, but if you look at what happened here, when it started looking around in the text, it actually started finding Keiko, Osprey, LJM, which turns out to be other secret partnerships that we didn't know about, but when we were searching for rawhide, it actually started finding these things in context, okay, around what we were actually looking for. So concept search was kind of the basis of what we were doing. What happened after we've actually found things with a concept search, we now start doing advanced analytics on top of that. So the first thing we do is once we've found something as a concept, let's assume it's a backdated stock option, the next thing we want to actually find out is maybe in a word part what other words were associated with this. We actually then want to find out on a timeline when all the stuff was taking place. We want to see a social network about who was sending who emails regarding backdated stock options. So the net effect is we also have tools here to do visual query building and also clustering, and then obviously the machine learning algorithms on top of that to do automated categorization. So the very first thing is clustering. So when we actually load data into the system initially, what the software will do, it'll actually take all the data in true form with signal and noise, tries to remove the top layer of noise. Then actually goes down and starts looking for the things that are interesting and unusual. Once it finds things that are interesting and unusual, it starts popping them up as clusters that you can actually see visually what's in your data before you've actually done any keyword searching. So the net effect is, as an investigator or as an executive, when you're looking at very large data sets, it's very hard to see what kind of language is being used in those data sets. So what this gives you is giving you very, very good clues about what's in the data. You got a question?
Just on that last word, so as an executive, what you're looking for, the executive is...
Just a moment.
Your last word there, an executive. So the executive is somewhat going with an hypothesis. For example, rawhide, you might be looking for a TV show.
Mm-hmm.
So could you clarify the idea of going in with a hypothesis of what you're looking for versus what machine learning really does is it's going to give you evidences of what you may not know you're perceiving.
Correct. That's absolutely so. And I mean, I would actually say that this is really, I would categorize it as almost a discovery phase at this stage because you actually don't know what you're looking for. And kind of part of the problem with keyword searching is that you assume that you know what you're looking for, but you really don't. Okay, when people in legal environments get together, the lawyers get together and say, oh, let's agree on the keywords, but they really don't know what's in the data. So this is much more about what's in the data as opposed to what the lawyers can actually agree to what the keywords might be. So that's kind of the problem. The problem is that people have never really looked at the data. So clustering is incredibly useful to try and give you an idea of what's in the data before you start your searches. Once you start your searches, then we can, the first thing that really pops up if we actually do a concept search, and the concept search we did here was on money, cash, and fraud. And what it does, it actually looks at all the words in the collection and tells you, when you were looking for money, cash, and fraud, it found stuff related to corporate, money, guilty, conspiracy, directing. This is actually, this data set was of Health South. I don't know if you remember that company in Alabama. This was their stuff. And this is the kind of information that was actually popping up in the word parts. So, interesting. So the word part really, as you can see, the bigger words just indicates a higher frequency of the word in the data set. But once again, it's giving you clues as an investigator what's maybe in the data before you really start searching. Timelines. Timelines are very, very significant because people have bad memories. They really don't remember when things actually happen. So timelines are very useful. So once again, if we're looking at a very large collection of email hypothetically in an investigation, we can now see on the timeline exactly when the emails were actually sent. And we could even be more specific now when actually having a look at the timeline when things actually occurred on the timeline, and then you can see on the timeline is actually the documents underneath. And this all ties back to the concept search. So we were searching for a specific concept, so it's now showing you the concept on the timeline. What's interesting about the timeline, it will also show you connection gaps, because sometimes things are missing. You might not even know them. Okay, and you know, once again, if you get involved in litigation, people are notorious for actually excluding stuff during important periods. So it's very important that your timeline technology can actually help you pick up on stuff that might be missing in a very short space of time. Social networks. Now we've searched for the concept, which is backdated stock options. Now we can see what happens, who was sending information to whom. As you, I don't know if you can see, but George Weissman there's actually got like a little red dot there. So the red dot is the sender and the white dots are the receivers. So George Weissman was sending a lot of stuff out and backdated stock options. The thicker the lines are, the more communication is being sent. And then we actually, in the software itself, have drill down capability here. We can actually drill down in specific people and actually go and have a look at it in more detail. So once again, as executives, it's very, very hard for us to try and find some of this stuff quickly. This can really, really help us. Another visualization of the same concept is really what we call the sonar. We really can't record Orchitect without having a sonar. So, I mean, you know, so we really have kind of the red dots once again that are sending. The concentric circles really is a representation of time, and each of the custodians have a unique position in the circle, and once again you can see the red dots are sending and the white dots are receiving, so you can actually see what's happening over time. We've even found that sometimes some of the litigators actually use some of these visualizations to actually take it to court to actually go and support, you know, certain information they're trying to portray.
Can you just go back in that slide?
Sure.
So I was just trying to trace the relationship between George Weissman and John Bibbett, and then you have this outlier, George Weissman Scott. Are they the same people?
Sorry.
So down below you have George Weissman Scott.
It could be the same person, yeah. You know, typically this is a very good indication because he might be sending it to his Hotmail account. That might be his Hotmail account. So he might be sending it to himself.
Okay, thanks.
With intellectual property, that's very typical. All right, and now we've actually had the rise of machine learning and e-discovery. And machine learning is like a very, very big topic today. And it's really infiltrating and touching many, many things. And machine learning is really helping us try and find that signal in the noise. There's just so much noise. How do you actually find it? So in the world of e-discovery specifically, they spoke about machine learning, and we had a, you know, I guess in e-discovery in 2010, we'd never really heard about machine learning. In our world, we call it predictive coding in the world of e-discovery. And it was a big misnomer. And quite frankly, attorneys don't like predictive coding because it's technically putting them out of business. So machine learning was never really even considered. And basically in April 2012, we had the first legal precedent, okay, where a judge actually approved machine learning or predictive coding to actually automatically categorize documents and actually try and reduce the document set. So that was a case called Global Aerospace. As a matter of fact, our technology was actually used for that. But the whole idea was, and I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail, that we could actually use a machine learning algorithm to actually learn how to categorize the documents as opposed to having armies of lawyers. So this is the, sorry, go ahead, please.
Well, perhaps you'll get into this.
Just one moment.
Perhaps you'll get into the background of Orchitect. So is your focus down on e-discovery? Because your technology is very valuable to public relations, advertising firms, and also looking for documents, material, content, and so forth. Are you just, is Orchitect
I'll be touching on that just a little bit later. But certainly, you know, I should just qualify, you know, what we have been doing has been focused primarily on e-discovery, but there are many, 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 many other applications that this can actually going to be used for. So sticking with the e-discovery process, the way that you typically do things is you actually, if you've got an e-discovery, you would actually go out and go and collect emails. You'd actually go and collect emails off the email server, off the shares, off the desktops, and then you end up with a whole lot of emails, a lot of duplicates. You then typically process them to try and eliminate the duplicates, and actually then send them off to your favorite law firm. Your favorite law firm then actually goes and takes an army of attorneys to actually look at all these emails. And if you've actually collected 1 million emails after they've been deduplicated, that's going to cost you $4 an email. So 1 million emails are going to cost you $4 million just for the privilege of these attorneys to be looking at your emails. And that's happening today, real time, every single day. That's the way it works. So it's a very, very expensive thing. The problem is that these attorneys can typically only look at about 50 or 60 emails an hour. And if you sit, if you imagine you guys are a group of attorneys looking at documents, by 2 hours you're bored. By 4 hours you're bored out of your head. Okay? 6 hours you need to eat, and then you need to go to the bathroom. And it's like an impossible task to try and keep everybody focused. And guess what? If you've got 100 attorneys, everybody's got a different opinion about what's responsive or what's not responsive. So you have a lot of things going on. So instead of that approach, our software says, just give me one attorney. Instead of having the army, just give me one. Okay. The way the software then works is we typically then go and, if we had 1 million documents, go and grab a random sample out of 1 million of 100 documents, and we present it to an expert. And the expert will actually look at the email and say, responsive, not responsive, responsive, not responsive. And by the time he's actually gone through the first 100 and categorized them, the next 100 gets presented. By the time he's gone through 3,000 to 5,000 documents, 2 or 3 days, the software says, I got it. I can now automatically categorize the rest of the documents. I've learned what you have taught me. So the expert has now taught the machine, okay, and the machine now takes over the categorization process. Where your attorney was maybe doing 50 or 60 documents an hour, our system will do 250,000 documents an hour, okay? And we're actually scaling it up now to about 1 million documents an hour. So significantly faster. What's also important, this will actually reduce the cost from about $4 a document to about 40 cents a document. So anybody in a corporation, massive return on investment. The technology and the machine learning will also reduce 90% of the noise and leave you 10% of the signal, the good stuff. Where you can take that 10% of the 1 million documents and then give that to attorneys now to review, okay, and you've actually got a much, much better scenario. Now you've got attorneys looking at real stuff that's important and relevant, and they can work with it. So we talk about the concept of precision. So if we talk about what the machine learning has actually done for you, look at precision is actually the percentage of documents it found that are responsive. So once again, if it actually reduced it and actually found only 10% of the documents, okay, those are the responsive documents. So we also talk about statistical recall, and recall is really your percentage of the responsive documents that were selected. So how many out of the documents totally selected were responsive. So we use these statistical precision and recall to try and measure and gauge how good the machine learning is actually progressing. We actually have online, real-time dashboards that while your single attorney is actually training the system, you can actually start getting an idea, okay, of how well the training is going, and at what point you actually want to get the machine to actually take over and actually start applying the machine learning to, and automatically start categorizing the rest of the documents. So this is typically what happens with machine learning and how accurate it is. It's actually uncanny. I mean, the first attorney that actually worked on the global aerospace case, his name was Tom Bricks from a company up in Pittsburgh called Schneider Harrison. Tom said he couldn't believe it. After sitting down and training the system for 17 hours, okay, they then let the system go, and the result of global aerospace is right up there on the right. But that basically means that they found 80% of the documents, and 80% of the documents were actually relevant as well. So that means after 17 hours of training, okay, they were getting those kind of results. Human review is somewhere in this range here with Team A and Team B, and you could really see that humans are terrible compared to how the machines are doing. So this is kind of I guess, the rise of the machines, but it's something that we need to be cognizant of. So that was how we did things traditionally. So every time there was a problem, we used to actually go and collect these documents from the email systems, and then, you know, if you typically got like a second request from the DOJ, you'd actually go and collect the documents, work all the documents, send all the documents to DOJ, and then you actually blow everything away, okay? You've got to make sure you destroy the documents afterwards. And if somebody asks the same question 3 months later, you have to go and collect the documents, process the documents. So it really became an untenable process. So we thought, well, why don't we rather take this technology and actually integrate it into the key data sources that actually exist within the enterprise, and actually automate the acquisition of it, that this could be a lights-out operation. If you look at how the cost of disk has come down, the cost of disk has come down dramatically over the years, and then give you tools that are easy to use, self-service, something that's much more Apple-like, like our smartphones, okay, really easy to use. Those are what the tools are actually going to look like. So we then said, okay, if you look at an enterprise, these are typically your sources of unstructured data: Microsoft Exchange, Lotus Notes, Instant Message, SharePoint, loose files, Yammer, Office 365, which is the cloud version of Exchange, Gmail. So if we take all this data, from our perspective, as long as we can convert everything to text, we can then load it into the universal repository. And once we do that, we can actually start applying the advanced analytics to actually provide you with all these visualizations that we actually spoke about. And what does this do? This is now not only servicing attorneys, but this is now helping people and executives throughout the organization actually solve some difficult problems. These tools also have different things that can actually be achieved within. So if we look at the needs and look at the capabilities, these are the kind of searches and things that we can actually start doing. Content analysis, who spoke to who knew what, when, volumetric, language expansion, proactive filtering, review annotation, language exploration. Because our algorithms are all mathematical, language doesn't matter. So technically speaking, we could actually analyze Klingon, okay, as long as we had a good Klingon attorney to actually, do the training of the system. All right, so how does the standard e-discovery process work? So if we actually have a look at email servers within enterprises, if we look at Microsoft Exchange today, there's a standard function in Exchange called journaling. And what journaling basically does is every email that's inbound, outbound, and internal will actually take a copy and actually send it off to the archive. And you do this because this is defensible in a court of law. So typically what we do is we actually turn it on. It's a standard function within the email systems, the messaging systems. Once you turn it on, unless it's interrupted, this just continues in perpetuity. So instead of us now trying to collect email when we've got a problem, this thing is now proactively actually just sending all the email into a repository. In this case, it's specifically called an archive. And this is a very typical process. I actually did a presentation to a bank up in Virginia the other day, and they said, please give me a copy of this slide, because this is exactly how our process works. Okay, so email system, turn on the journal feed, send it to the archive. If your attorney now has got a question, they typically have to go to an e-discovery person. E-discovery person typically does not have SQL skills, so they have to go to an IT person to actually go and formulate a SQL query to fire it against the archive. And now they typically extract by custodian or person, date range, and keywords. Once they extract it, they then get a massive amount of data back, typically in a PST format. And this PST format then goes back to the e-discovery guy. He loads it into his favorite tool, which is normally something like a Clearwell or something. Okay. They then actually take that, once it's processed, put it into some kind of review application like Relativity, and then it actually is available to inside counsel as well as outside counsel. Excuse me. So a very complicated, convoluted process. If we look at the Architect process, once you turn on the journal feed, it goes straight into your Architect repository. You index it once for archiving and e-discovery. Your lawyer now has a request that no longer need to go to e-discovery person or the IT person, can go straight to the archive, and they can actually go and have a look and use the advanced technologies we just spoke about, dramatically reduce the data set. I was speaking to a company here in Atlanta the other day that's very big in the hardware business, and they were saying that they basically do all the extractions from the cloud. And because they do their archive is in the cloud and they do the extractions, they have to download these massive amounts of data from the cloud, and this is a big problem. Because the archives as such has got no analytics and no predictive coding to try and help you cut down and get to a much smaller data set that you can download only a smaller and relevant data set. So what we do is we help you cut it down to a much smaller and relevant data set that you can then give to your attorneys, and then typically they actually have smaller, richer data sets that go to outside counsel. So there's just massive ROI for anybody that's in the business. So I guess IBM Watson was really a big boon for us, because when people actually figured out that IBM Watson could play Jeopardy and beat most people, okay, machine learning was on. Machine learning was okay. And the net effect is that was kind of the rise of machine learning, okay, and this is when we started, in our ecosystem with the automated data acquisition. These are some of the problems that we help customers solve. Like in HR, we found 7 potential instances of dismissible offenses related to sex and violence. We saved them over $20 million in potential lawsuits. In internal counsel, a pending lawsuit that could have bankrupted the company turns out to have no merit. We saved the company $14 million. So these are the kind of things that you can actually do. These are the kind of things that executives need to determine very fast and upfront, okay, that can save a huge amount of time and money.
I've got a question.
Sure.
You give kind of number of examples on litigation and all that, kind of a big brother watching over us, kind of a little bit scary, right? But are there examples that you're going to have, like a few slides back, you gave example about how we could use it to identify some weaknesses or gaps within how we do business. For example, we do the audit business. Are there data that we can identify to say, hey, these are the areas that we find are very weak controls within the clients that we are auditing. Maybe we need to emphasize that control to help them better in their financial workflow.
Yes. I think, as much as I've spoken very much today about Ediscovery, we definitely have a role to play in governance, risk, and compliance. I think the biggest challenge that you have in governance, risk, and compliance today is the fact that people in governance, risk, and compliance are more concerned about events, okay, and actually recording the events, okay, is actually analyzing the data. And it's very hard with the existing tools that we actually have, okay, to actually analyze the data. If you think about our good friends at the NSA, okay, that have got a facility out in Salt Lake City, they've got a yottabyte, okay, of data just sitting in that facility that they can't analyze properly because they haven't got proper tools. So it's just a real challenge about what you can actually analyze and what you can't analyze. So yeah, so I think it definitely is applicability in terms of the audit field. But there's also applicability in the medical field where you actually have what is the name? ICD-9 and ICD-10 codes. The categorization of those codes and how you actually classify things has got massive impacts on hospitals and clinics and how they claim back money from insurance companies. So there's a lot of room for machine learning in those kind of scenarios. There's a lot of room for machine learning in many applications. Please go ahead, you've got a question.
Which is, his question was on Big Brother. I saw this kind of technology used in a pharmaceuticals company where the lawyers wanted to make sure that any call coming in on a certain drug that was out there in the market might in the future be used in litigation. And someone calling in the customer service area talked about that drug. That particular drug was pulled off the recorder and saved. So what you're saying is selectively going at it proactively ahead of time and then having that. It's not a Big Brother in the sense that they're recording everything and keeping everything to find some fault. It's they proactively go after it and look specifically for something they think may be a problem in the future.
Well, that's very interesting that you should say that. I mean, as I just mentioned, the whole rise of machine learning is very new. Okay, and what we've done in Ediscovery is kind of after the fact. So if you actually have a problem, then you sit down an attorney, you train the system, you try and find after the fact. What you're talking about is kind of proactive, okay, monitoring of what's actually going on. So the next phase in the whole machine learning process is to specifically start building language models, okay, within the enterprise that actually address different areas. So you might actually have a problem in HR. So now we start developing, and I'm just going to, for argument's sake, call it a lexicon, but start developing a lexicon that consists of words and phrases that relate to HR and HR problems. So let's call that the HR filter. And basically every email that comes in, goes out, or gets sent internal, goes through this filter. If it's a problem, it drops it into the HR bucket, and the HR compliance guy will look at this bucket every day and say, that's a good one, that's a bad one, that's a good one. And as he keeps going through his bucket every day, that information of how he's categorizing that stuff gets fed back to the filter, and the filter will start getting smarter over time. So that's actually going to make the HR guy's compliance person's life much, much easier, okay? And it's also going to make him much, much more effective in his job. What's also very important about this, if the HR guy leaves, guess what? The filter still works. Okay, whoever comes into that job, okay, is going to look at the bucket every day and might start applying different principles, but it's still going to work. So that's just an example of HR. We could also apply this to maybe regulatory compliance, FINRA compliance. I mean, there are companies that are like in the medical devices space that are very concerned about intellectual property theft. And you know, I met with a company in New Jersey the other day, and they found somebody that worked at their company 18 months ago had just been busted at another company for intellectual property theft, and now they were concerned to go and look through the records to see what actually happened to them while he was there. So, you know, those kind of problems exist with intellectual property theft. So, you know, I think there's a lot of application for all this information. Unless there are any more questions, I think it's just important for us maybe to realize as executives that these elements of machine learning is actually going on in our environment every single day, from Ediscovery to government's risk and compliance, from driving our cars autonomously to flying our planes autonomously. Machine learning is becoming a way, even from the Roomba vacuum cleaner cleaning our house every day. Okay, it's all machine learning really. So, you know, with that being said, the only way that I think we as executives can effectively try and find out what is going on is by using machine learning, advanced analytics, to try and cut through all this noise and actually try and get to the signal. So the whole trick here is to try and get faster knowledge, higher reduction of volumes, reduce the cost, less time, and less risk.